So the agenda is first the Peter speech on term for fair skills change on. After we have the interactive discussion using an interface, and after we hope to have volunteers and people interesting for this working group. So Peter McKilton will talk about the Fair Skills initiative, the aim of which is to create a terminology for the skills necessary to make data fair and to keep it fair. Pete has been involved in curation ontologies, open science, and research data management for over 15 years, and is currently the coordinator of the Fair Sharing Registry and Community. So, Pete, I think now you can share your screen and your camera.
Okay.
I turn my camera off because there were some difficulties to hear me during the session, so I think it's better for everybody.
Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my slides. Please do shout if you can't. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I'd like to thank Roman and the other organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk to you for the next 15 minutes or so about our work in the Terms of Fair Skills community. Most of the work that I'll be covering today was supported by an EOSC Co-Creation Award and has been done primarily by folk from CoData, the eScience Data Factory, and Fair Sharing, which, as Roman just said, is where I'm from. So I've just changed my slide. Tell me if you can't see that change. But you will have heard some of these kind of things before because that's why you're in this breakout session. But what are we trying to solve with Terms of Fair Skills? Well, training resources for data stewards and indeed on good data management are fragmented. There's all sorts of different content that can be found online, different tutorials, lectures, webinars, and so on. They're all over the place. And there's no information available about the specific competencies that one may need in order to take one of those courses, or that may be conferred on you were you to take some training content. So it's about trying to collect all of these resources and also place them into context so that you know what skills you'll gain afterwards and what skills you need beforehand. So the Terms of Fair Skills initiative was born really to build a terminology for the competencies, the skills and the knowledge necessary to make data fair and to keep it fair. There's a number of potential uses for this type of terminology. The first of which is obviously discovery, to facilitate the annotation, search and evaluation of fair enabling materials, e.g. training materials and resources, to help in the design of these courses and stewardship curricula, to help in training, so trainers who teach fair data skills, and also for researchers who wish to see what gaps they may have in their skills and therefore find courses that can help fill those gaps. And then finally, in the formalization of job descriptions, or conversely CVs, that can detail these recognized structured competencies so that you can start to formalize all of these activities. So just a moment ago, I mentioned that the work was carried out by 3 groups, and that's not entirely true, because as I'll show you over the next couple of slides, this is truly a community effort. And on this slide, you can see some of the logos of the groups involved. And this tallies up to about 50 individual people who have provided input on Terms of Fair Skills, be they ontologists, educators, domain experts, or simply interested parties. And you may notice as well that these logos come from across the world, although many are European, and across domain. So here's, fancy transition. Here's a couple of timeline slides to show you the progress that we've done. The initiative itself started back in January 2019 as a coffee break discussion between friends at the Go Fair workshop. And we then convened a coalition of the willing, if you like, all of which was technically unfunded at this point, to have an in-person workshop, if you remember those, at the CoData headquarters in Paris. And here we use the FAIR4S framework as a base to create and curate a communal Google spreadsheet of all the potential terms that one could need in a FAIR data terminology, and the hierarchy or the links between them, and where possible, start to think about some definitions and synonyms. And that was in May in 2019. So we took the headings and the subheadings from FAIR4S, which is FAIR for Skills. And for those unfamiliar with this framework came out of the EOSC pilot work and aims to cover the stewardship skills necessary to deliver FAIR data. So it's a good place to start. So we took those headings and subheadings and then started to try and flesh them out in that big Google spreadsheet. So after the workshop at CoData, a crack team of ontologists, so Alison Lister from Fair Sharing, Jan Lefranc from the eScience Data Factory, and also me, it happens, took the spreadsheet and converted it into a fully functional OWL RDF file. So we kind of turned it into something that could look more like a terminology. We then worked on it a bit more, using tools such as Protégé to refine the relationships, add more definitions, and so on. And then we presented this at the second in-person workshop at Dance in The Hague. At this point, the terminology had kind of 4 axes. So we had activity, knowledge, skills, and aptitude. Then things paused for a while as we looked for funding to take things further. And thankfully, in September of last year, we received an EOS Co-Creation Award, which allowed myself, Jan, and Laura Malloy from CoData to work on the terminology and to organize a number of virtual hackathons with the community to refine the model and terms further. So these were our aims as part of that Co-Creation Award. So primarily to continue the development of the terminology with our annotation and coordination groups in the community to create a kind of version 0.1 of the terminology, a prototype. To do so, we were going to use 2 real-world training data sets as use cases to drive this development and also to ensure a broad and pragmatic initial spread of terms, so we weren't focusing on one particular use case. And through these hackathons, we were going to refine the terms iteratively through the annotation of various training materials. We didn't start from scratch, so we had our spreadsheet, but we also looked at what was out there. So we looked at the Edison framework, CASRAI, Research Data Management, and of course the FAIR4S. We looked at all of those and were inspired by them in terms of our structure and also some of the terms that we've imported into terms for FAIR skills. And this is also still an iterative process, so we haven't finished looking at those yet. And so with this co-creation fund, from last September through to December, we had a number of virtual workshops where we refined the model. We designed a new core model. We developed new competency models within that. We assessed all of the terms in the spreadsheet and actually threw quite a lot of them out. And we started to collate this training material for annotation. And we started working on a tool called Semaphore, which is from the eScience Data Factory. So we continued through these hackathons. We had another set in January of this year. We've now got the years wrong. This is now this January, not last January. We received feedback through annotation with Semaphore. We removed a large number of terms, added synonyms, and then in February, we had a final hackathon where we started to attach terms to the FAIR principles within the model, started planning a final push, annotated more online training material using Semaphore, and I'll explain some of this later, in fact, on this slide. So the methodology that we used, the 2 use cases that we had, one was life science specific, using the Elixir training materials and events portal called TESS, and the other was more generic, so based on the RDA CoData summer schools as part of the FAIRS project. And we took many training slides and webinars from these 2 and used them via Web Protégé to collaboratively edit the ontology and use the Semaphore annotation tool, which is derived from B2 Note, to do this annotation. And then periodically we would release the new version of the terminology on GitHub. So everything's all open and transparent. So the Semaphore tool for annotation is a Chrome plugin, and you can see here on the slide, it comes across whatever web page you're looking at and allows you to annotate that web page with terms from Terms for Fair Skills and any other ontology that you have. So it also then releases all of these annotations either as JSON-LD, so as triples, or also as CSV if you just want to check the annotation more simply. So it allows you to search through all of the semantic tags and classes within Terms for Fair Skills, and importantly, if a user didn't find a term within Terms for Fair Skills, they could add a keyword that then we could assess and start using that to add a new term or new synonym into Terms for Fair Skills. So we use Semaphore to iteratively annotate all of these training materials, and in doing so, improve the terminology. So progress and outputs, now that we've finished this co-creation work. So back in September 2020, we had this spreadsheet and it had 243 terms on it. And this was our core model. And I'm not going to go, just looking at the time, I'm not going to go through all of these models, but you can see we had a simple model where we were trying to capture information on what activity a user was performing, and then what requirements that activity had. So it would require certain knowledge, skill, and aptitude, and they would be about a particular activity. And then these would be related to both the FAIR 4S headings and to FAIR in some way. And all of this comes from the learning medium, which is, say, the webinar or the PowerPoint presentation. And then in December 2020, after our first hackathons, we redeveloped the model. We removed the need for some of these knowledge of relationships, which were a little bit redundant. And we also assessed and started to integrate terms from the CASRI Research Data Management Glossary. And at this point, the terminology was blooming, such that we had 746 terms. 346 were from CASRI. We also started to review the terms and structures within Edison and add new relationships between all of the terms. And so this was the model at this point, where you can see we now have technical concepts and soft skills that an individual may want or have an aptitude for. And these would relate to, again, the training material that we're using to learn, that will confer knowledge or skills, and back to the activity that they want to perform. So in January 2021, we had these more further hackathons. We redeveloped the model again. We merged FAIR for Skills into the activity, and we narrowed the scope, and we started to prune the ontology. We had 605 terms at this point, and we're starting to take away some of the terms from CASRI as they were slightly out of scope, and started to remove some redundancy we had. And then we had this model, which I'll skip over, and this is the model that we have now as of today. And all of this is available on the Terms for Fair Skills website, so you can have a look at this in more detail later. So as of now, we have the terminology, which we've been building iteratively over the last couple of years. As of today, it has 612 terms, 262 of which are from CASRI. It's all open, traceable, attributable, it's fair, it follows best practice, including the FAIR's Fair, Fair Semantics and OBO. There's the GitHub link, and we've also got the Semaphore Annotation tool, which, as I say, is a Chrome plugin, and it can work on Google Slides and so on. And that's now in the process of commercialization, but has been a very useful tool for annotation during this process. And so what happens next with our work? So we've just submitted a report to EOSC, which will be publicly available very shortly. We will continue development. It's all on GitHub, so you can contribute yourselves. And we will continue to reach out and reuse import terms from existing terminologies. We're not trying to build anything new. We're trying to build the best tool we can to help people. And also we're exploring a number of different use cases, such as the Elixir FAIR cookbook, the Elixir test portal, which I've mentioned, the FAIR's Fair Competency Centre, and also within Fair Sharing, the Fair Sharing's Educational Fair Assist tool. And then if anyone here would like to start looking at Terms for Fair Skills and using it, please do get in touch. and that's just under 14 minutes. So I'll stop there and stop sharing my screen. I should say also these slides I'll make available straight after this talk and put a link in the notes. So I'll stop sharing and take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pete. It's a great presentation. I think that after this presentation, we want to know more about the core models. But I think we will have time to discuss. So just send me your slides, and perhaps for the discussion we will use them again,
Okay.
or put a link in the Google Doc. What I suggest is that we take time for questions, because it is, a démarche that is reusing other démarches, and it's exactly what we want to do. So to not duplicate the efforts, and the question is how to do that, in which sense, and so do you have questions? Do not hesitate to turn on your camera and your microphone. Okay, not at this at this level. So yes, Susanna asked, what has been your bigger challenge? It's for Pete. Pete.
Okay, I'm having trouble. So the biggest challenge, I think the biggest challenge is working remotely with all these people during a pandemic. And the second biggest challenge is building a terminology which is useful and still logically coherent while being pragmatic. It's that tension between building something which is ontologically beautiful and something that is still useful to all the many users, I guess.
Do you hear me? Because sometimes I have doubt about that. Yes, okay. So I have shared my screen again on the slides. Now we will have an interactive discussions about the challenge and all the aims of these groups on the roadmap. So to identify some criteria for prioritization of those actions, I propose to use this website. So you just have to be connected with live.voxvote.com, live.voxvote.com, with the PIN number that is here. I let you do during the time I share the application. So it's here. Okay. So now the floor is yours to all the attendees. Do you see my slides? Not my slides, the first question on my screen. Yes, that's great. So what I want for everybody is to put ideas and inputs, because it's a participating session. So the first question is, what are the challenges for you about terminologies for data stewards? And I will, you can answer several times, and I will refresh the page after 2 minutes. So Pete, you can answer too, because you have lots of experiences. in there, and perhaps we will comment together if you agree. If you are here.
Yep, still here. Yeah, sorry. it's really, the system's really not working for me today. But yeah, no, I'll add some comments in.
Yes, Laurence, I've put the link in the chat, and you have the pin number. So Laurence helped to write notes. So thank you very much, Laurence. Laurence Mabille from Toulouse. She's from the Shark interest group, like me. So what are the first results now? Oh, so you have data different means that is most frequent, and terminology, case quality context use. I will pass in this. Yes, it's better in this format. So we have four answers at this moment. 5, 6. Pete, can you comment all of them and say what you think? What are you think about them?
Yeah, no, I mean, I see and I agree with all of those, particularly those of many are built with no clear use case. For me, I think that that's the most important thing, choosing the most appropriate use cases so that you have something to guide the building of the terminology. Otherwise, you build something that may look beautiful, but actually may not be fit for purpose. And that's what we've tried to do with Terms for Fair Skills, with the domain specific from the life sciences use cases within Elixir, and then the RDA CoData and Fair's Fair use case of kind of fair metadata webinars and so on. And I think some of the other comments there, ensure it works for all disciplines and different data management workflows. Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. There's a mission creep aspect to building these things where people want it to solve all of their problems, but it's one terminology. And I think there's a scope issue there too. It needs to be a tightly defined scope with a tightly defined use case. And then other terminologies can be used, for instance, for potentially for subjects or for other more domain-specific terms. For the comment on double meanings, terminology can mean different things in different contexts. I mean, yeah, I totally agree, and that's part of the problem with building a terminology. What kind of terminology is it? Is it a glossary? Will there be enough synonyms? Will those synonyms work across disciplines and potentially across languages? And that's where I always think a terminology is never complete, it's never finished. It always needs additional work. And that's partially why we're building Terms for Fair Skills in such an open manner, such that people can reuse it and also add to it, because it'll never be finished, right? So, I mean, that's kind of my opinion. I'd be interested to hear what you think, Roman, and what other people think on those comments too.
Yes, I think that another comment that is recurrent is what is really a data steward, and it's not the same perception between disciplinary. So, do you have comments on that? Perhaps you, Pete, or Susanna? I know that you are here, so don't hesitate to take the floor.
I will let Susanna jump in. Maybe Susanna's also having trouble with the system. I don't know. So that comment on who is a data steward, what does data steward mean? Yeah, again, this is all about kind of definitions and scope. And I see from working with different communities that data stewards can have slightly different roles. And I think in terms of what we've tried to do is separate out the name of the person's position with what activities the person actually does, because a data steward can have different activities on different days and different activities in different institutions. But all of these activities are around good data management. And so for what we've tried to do, we've tried to say data stewardship is about the activities that someone performs on their data, rather than the definition of what each data steward does. And that's where you can use the terminology to create that job description by taking those activities to say, okay, this particular definition of a data steward at this institution requires these competencies and will involve these activities. So to try and atomize the actual activities people do rather than just the title that a data steward may have, if that makes sense.
Okay, I have a complementary question for you, Pete, about this kind of issue on data steward definition. In Fair for Fair skills, you have skills for data stewards, but only fair skills. You don't have, for instance, care skills, trust skills.
Yeah. So I mean, we're really at the start of building this terminology, and it's a question of scope. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I think potentially in the future, and again, reaching out to all these various communities, as it's not really the position of me or any of the other ontologists in the group to do this. We need to work with each of these communities, but it needs to be done in a stepwise manner, as otherwise it starts to become a very large terminology that doesn't serve anyone. So I think using care and trust and all these other very useful initiatives and frameworks is something that we'll need to do in the future. But we also need to have strong use cases for those. Otherwise, we may add these terms and classes and change the model, but actually not have a use case for that yet. So I think it depends. We should be use case driven in terms of how we build and refine the terminology.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Volmar, you said something in the chat. Do you want to take the floor?
Hello, I'm not sure. Did I activate my sound correctly?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, super. So, I mean, there are situations where IT staff, curators, and I mean, depending on your profession, you put different meanings in words and also in different contexts. You put different meanings into the terms used. And I mean, if we define a vocabulary, we can't really enforce people to adopt it. So, I mean, do you see the users of this terminology as only data stewards, or, I mean, if you're looking for classifying training materials that would be used for a data steward looking for it, then you don't really have to look outside. But otherwise, you might need to consult kind of IT staff, curators, or other people who we interact with to make sure that we're not kind of taking some of their core vocabulary and redefining it to our needs, so to speak.
Okay. Yuri, you want to say
yes,
something?
I posted my question. Actually, terminology is something what I'm what we wait in our project fair activity for defining data stewardship competences. And the goal that it's not only that we need also define controlled vocabulary for data analysis, for machine learning applications, and specific very demanded use is assessment of CVs, job description. So this is something what I don't know if it falls into task scope. Not only just dictionary or terms, but also such kind of like data set, reference data set for data analysis. What machine learning.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. Other reactions on this discussion now?
Maybe a reply to that. So
Yes.
I think it would be useful. I'm not sure how important it would be, but it would be useful to make sure that we reach out to people and not only include people who are already aware and kind of invested in data stewardship, to make sure that, I mean, we get an outside point of view on the terms we define as well.
This was also my question about links and cooperation, these terms, activity by code data. And another comment is if people know what is DAMA association and DM box, they published already a couple of years ago the dictionary of data management related terms, like 200 pages.
Yeah, thank you, Yuri. Yeah, I'm aware of that, and it's something that we're looking at actually. I think for all these questions, these are really good points that people are making, especially some of the points that Wilmar mentioned earlier. For all of this, I think the answer is, at least for terms of fair skills, this is a community effort. It's at very early stages, and there's a danger of scope and mission creep if we try to add too much in there too fast. But that's also why, as I said before, we're trying to be driven by use cases. But going back to Wilmar's point about kind of reaching outside of the community that already know about these things, that's exactly right. And lots of the logos that I showed on one of my slides are people who are not data stewards, are people who are IT managers or who are curators, such as myself, actually. And so we are trying to do that, but this takes time, and it also takes kind of willingness and awareness within the community. And so it's something that we're trying to build, such as coming to the RDA here to present. Anyone who wants to be involved can and should be involved, just to ensure that we create terms that are useful for people and that fit their use cases. But I would be cautious about expanding the scope to include data set analysis and so on, because that's a very useful and worthy thing to do, but that would create a very large terminology that could become problematic to manage. I can see Susanna might want to jump in now. Sorry, Susanna.
Oh, no problem. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, I'll be able to. Thank you. No, I was responding to Mary's point. I totally agree with you. Absolutely. This is an open effort, and anybody with the use cases should join Term for Fair Skill. But the scope of Term for Fair Skill has been very well defined from the beginning. Like Peter has eloquently said, adding more area, it's simply not going to fit the scope and the timeline by which the people line up with the use cases are ready to implement it. So I think it would be good, if you have the need for analysis terms, there are also ontology out there which could cover part of it. You could initiate that part and can be just like a orthogonal effort, but simply it's really worth keeping the scope of the focus of the Term for Fair Skill to enable the people that have already invested the time and have lined up these resources that can implement it to start actually doing it and put in action, because we will still need to keep refining it, even if the focus is just around the skills.
Thanks, Susanna. So just a word before other reactions. We will not cut the discussion, but just to say to you that the second question is open on VoxVote. The second is the aims of this subgroup. I know that you can have lots of ideas. So if we produce recommendations in RDA formats, what could be the contents of these recommendations? Because, when we have an interest group or a working group in RDA, the main outputs are recommendations for the whole community. So please enter your things. There is already one answer, but I hope others. So please participate. Someone want to comment the first answer?
Yeah, I think you should just have a look, Romain, to the comment. We are not able to add the answer. I think you need to refresh or do something on your side, perhaps.
There is only one. You see my screen with interface, no?
Yeah, we see your screen, but we are not able to add our answer because when we refresh it, it says waiting for the next question
Okay.
to be displayed. So
I do it again.
thanks.
So normally it should be the case now. Do you have access to the second questions? Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Perhaps a mistake from my side. Sorry about that. So perhaps somebody, Pete, do you have a comment for the first answer that was answered?
Yeah, I completely agree with it. I think it's a great idea to define more use cases. I mean, yeah, this is what I think that we should do. Use cases and also surfacing all of these existing initiatives, as we've been mentioning on the call. There's plenty of things out there, and one of the problems which can lead to people reinventing the wheel is they simply don't know that these things exist. And so one of the powers of the RDA is to surface all of this information. So I think mapping that landscape and defining those use cases is the key thing to do.
Okay, I will refresh again. Now we have 4 other comments about the other response, a primer or guide to newcomer to using the terminology. Oh, that's a great idea. I think on the time I've discovered the ontology world, I was totally lost. I think it's the same for lots of people. Anything about that? Susanna, I'm sure that you have a comment on this.
What question? Sorry, ask the question again.
Yes, there are other answers, and particularly one, a primer or guide to newcomer to using the terminology.
Yeah, that's interesting. Depends what we mean for guide. Are we talking about user as for end user or user as developer that can take the terminology and implement in a system? I mean, when a terminology is built, there are different target user. The primary one, in my view, are let's say, developer of annotation tool or registry or whatever, where the terminology get implemented, get added. For example, you tag a registry with this terminology, because then that will help the end user of the registry to, let's say, use those term tag to filter or search and etc. So I think sometimes when we talk about guide for user, depends if it is a technical guide or then it's, it's a guide for the ultimate end user of the resource that will implement the terminology. Does it make sense?
Yes, it's a really good point. Thanks, Susanna. I think that we have to add this in the notes, and perhaps we will build a terminology about guides on the terminology.
I think what will be useful is when somebody come, let's say there is a terminology which is being built. When somebody come and say, I want to help, I want to contribute to this because I need it for X and Y, we need to understand exactly what they need it for. Like I said, let's say you have a registry, you want to tag the content of your registry with the terminology because you will drive the query and you can do filtering using, the terminology tree. Then it is important to understand that use case, because that need will be also reflect how you build the terminology, how you build the relation on the terms, how granular you go, or how shallow you go. So I really think when we bring people in, we onboard people in a collaborative terminology, they have to come with a lot of information documentation with their specific needs so that the terminology can be built to meet their need. It's almost the other round. It's the people coming in almost, they need to bring the documentation of their needs so that help the collaborative building.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. The third question is open. Do you see the question on is it working? It's a bit redundant with the precedent one, but it's about toolbox and landscaping tools like mind map or things like that. Do you have ideas that will provide help for newcomers or experimented data stewards? So I let you answer. I will refresh. At this time, no response, but I know that you have all ideas about that. Pete, a comment on the toolbox that you could want out, Susanna? Yes, if you want.
No, I don't want to comment. I want to actually ask you to explain a little bit more what the question is so that we can answer a bit more precisely.
Okay, I will precise. So what could be the possible tools or toolbox or tools for landscape or landscaping actions that we could have in this subgroup to enhance the work on data steward terminologies? That's more clear or not?
So I think I've just added my comment in there, which is basically survey. I think the best way to start for this type of thing, and this is where, again, I think the RDA is really useful, is to launch a carefully crafted survey to ask people, just as we're doing today, what's out there, what problems do you foresee, such as different groups, different roles, calling different things with the same words. I mean, this is a classic problem. So what words do they use, and what definitions do they have, and how can we surmount those problems? I think a survey on this type of thing would be really useful within the RDA, but also reaching out into more kind of discipline and domain specific areas too, to understand what's out there in terms of good data stewardship, even when people don't call it data stewardship. I think is probably the best start.
Okay, I refresh notes. I think that the two answers are from you. They said integrate in Wikipedia, Wikidata.
I didn't add that. I don't know who did.
Okay, so the person that would want to make a comment.
So I added that, and I was probably a bit too hot on the button. I didn't hear the question to the end before I wrote it, and I should have probably added some explanation. So the basic idea is to kind of test the vocabulary in real life scenarios and see if you can get reactions or comments on how well the vocabulary works for structuring or organizing materials. And one use case for that could be to integrate the vocabulary into kind of Wikipedia structures or articles, and possibly part of the kind of Wikidata, more structured vocabulary around Wikipedia.
Okay, thanks, Volmar. Any other comments or idea on this subject? If not, we will have the fourth question. That is more practical. So do you see the question? I click on the start button. So normally you have access to the question. Can you confirm that to us? Great. So Is the question clear enough? Okay, great. So we will wait. We know that the first thing to do when you begin a work is to have an idea of all existing démarches. I think that Fair for Fair skills in a really good base, but perhaps there are others. So if you know other works on this kind of, because Fair for Fair skills have done the same démarche, I think. But perhaps you will have comments, Susanna, on it. But there are other steps after. What are they? What do you think about that? I will refresh now. So we have two answers. The first one is design, prototype, evaluate, improve, repeat. Who want to comment that? Perhaps the person that I have given this answer.
Yes, that was me again.
That's great.
And I mean, it's the same idea, like making sure that you get some feedback on actual real life use case scenarios. So try to get a working vocabulary, maybe a small one out there early, test it out somewhere and see that it works, or, I mean, what should be fixed. There are also kind of processes in developing controlled vocabularies in general from the kind of archives, libraries, and museum sector that you could look into, but I'm not sure if that would be the best approach for this case.
Any comments or remarks about these ideas of steps? Okay, so the second one, I think it's from Susanna or Pete. The surveys. Can you comment?
Yeah, that was me. I wasn't truly sure the scope of the question, but I was thinking in terms of for this group, survey for those other initiatives that people are working on, and then define the scope of a terminology, and then, as I say, use case driven, do some hackathons, work with the community, and make sure that the resulting terminology is open and fair. And just to comment on Walmar's points, I agree with those, and that's kind of what we've tried to do with Terms for Fair Skills. Although the kind of framework we've been following is from the Obo Foundry, which is from the life sciences, and then also the Fair Semantics document from Fair's Fair. But yeah, so I agree with those. And then I don't know who added the third one, perhaps Susanna. I don't know if that was you.
Yes, you mean I added check what doesn't fit in Term for Fair Skill and maybe create an orthogonal ontology. And I've also sent a +1 to Lise, who said that, well, she might want to comment herself, so I leave her to talk later. So I think this is the thing. I mean, if people think that there are extra area that should be somehow ontologized, but if Term for Fill has a specific scope and I don't know, the people in Term for Skill, which, by the way, is not just Peter and Alison and I. There are many other people. That's why I'm not talking on behalf of everyone. But if the Term for Fair Skill has a very defined scope, maybe people can create an orthogonal terminology that can be used in combination with Term for Fair Skill to cover other area.
Okay, just a quick question, Susanna. What do you mean by orthogonal terminology?
Okay, so this is a concept in a way used by the Obo Foundry, like Peter just mentioned, in the biomedical area, where the Obo Foundry creates a set of, they call it reference ontology, which are orthogonal. That practically you don't have terms, they have a very well-defined scope, and you don't have overlap of the terms because they are known as reference ontology. But then you can create what are called application ontology, which means you use part of this reference ontology to build what you need that's very specific to your application. Let me give an example. In fair sharing, which is a registry of standard, repository, and policy, etc., we use a number of ontology to in order to tag the record according to discipline, according to the type of data. Later, we will add according to the type of skill you want to search. And this means we need to create for fair sharing an application ontology that fits fair sharing need by taking element, subclasses, classes, chunks of existing reference ontology and put them together using best practice, which means you import a term from a reference ontology, you track the ID, it comes from that one, you know where it's from, and you build something that fulfills your application. Does it make sense? Sorry, it's a long answer, but
but it's clear, and I know that it's always recommended to use ontologies for annotations, and that's a really good practice, but it's not automatically given by newcomer or in disciplines that don't know if there is an adapted ontology to describe a word. So in the data steward world, I think that, yes, we have to connect all things that are already existing just to describe what we want to describe, and that's a good point. Thanks, Susanna. Now we have only 2 or 3 minutes to wrap up. What I want now is that in the terminology, in the Google Doc, you have a line after the attending list that is the interest, your interest in recommendation writing that will be built in the next year. So I propose to everybody that is interested in this démarche to come and write the name, and we will have some theses to organize this work and to try to push it with all people that want. So I am in, Peter too, and I've added Laurence, but I don't know if she wants, but it's just to to enhance. So do not hesitate. As you can see, it's open and inclusive. So, okay. Do not hesitate to add comments and definitions in the notes too, like, for instance, orthogonal ontology. It's the first time I heard that, but okay, that's terms that needs to be understandable by everybody, and I think that it's always the issues. And I would like to thank very much Pete and Susanna for all the comments, and I want to thanks to Laurence for all the notes and all other people that take notes. I think that we have now less than 1 minute, but if you have a last comment, do not hesitate. And if not, I let you join the main session with the exit button. It was really a pleasant session and a good discussion. Thank you very much.